So this is a great segue, the last presentation, because for a very long time, like so many of us, I had something and I didn't know what it was. And that exploration that we all do and trying to, we put it on the side and we come back to it every year and we keep on thinking and working on it. And so I did that. And, sorry. Left click. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong mouse here. Oh, there we go. So in the year 2000, Norm Flaterman had an auction of his fabulous collection, of a huge collection at Butterfield's in San Francisco. And a few of us, Mr. Hamadeh, were very lucky back then to be aware of this auction and to acquire from it. I got this great photo album, and when it arrived, I looked at the note that Flaterman had written. He had actually written inside the album the name of a French aviator, and you have to excuse me, I'm terrible pronouncing French, but his name was a famous aviator named Guinan. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it.
Guinan?
Yeah, G-U-I-G-N-A-N-D.
Guinan.
So I looked at the same pictures that he looked at, and I thought, it's just not close enough. So I kept on trying to pursue who I thought the aviator might be. This photo album, which the last slide showed the cover of it, has 16 photographs of these two gentlemen being presented with the Legion of Honor at a military, huge military assembly. You can see ranks and ranks of infantry back there, and everyone's lined up. And these two gentlemen are being presented with the Legion of Honor. And so I thought, that having the Legion of Honor and the album having a date on it, I could find, it would just, it would match up. I'd just figure out very easily who got the Legion of Honor on that date. Of course, no one did. And why they picked that date may have been the day they had the ceremony, but not the official day that they got the Legion of Honor, and so on and so on. So
the one on the right looks like Georges Durand.
Well, you're quite right.
Dutch volunteer.
This is Georges Durand, and this is Jean Beaumont. And what was the key to all of this was that on the epaulette of Jean Beaumont is the number 23 for Escadrille 23. So that was exciting. You can see there they're standing and waiting for the very important presentation, which always involves, of course, le grand bisou, where they're kissed by the French general, and again. And knowing it was Escadrille 23 and looking through the history of Escadrille 23, it became possible, along with some wonderful help from the SHAA, the Service Historique in France. You write away, and you don't hear anything for a year, and of course, you're never going to hear, and then you get an envelope, an inch thick, because they not only had to do it, they had to do it in vast detail. And fantastic research on their part. And so I learned all about Escadrille 23 and Jean Beaumont and Georges Durand. And it turned out that Jean Beaumont became a favorite of Jacques Martin, who is the editor-publisher of La Guerre Aérienne Illustrée. And Martin would run around France to the airfields and talk to the aviators and take his notes, and then come back and type up these wonderful stories with pictures of the aviators and the life that they're going through. And here's a very, you can see when you look at the different photos of Jean Beaumont, the stress, like with Guynemer, the stress in the face that happens, you know, of constant battle. So Mortain has article after article after article about Jean Beaumont, and here he is stepping out of a Sopwith 1.5 Strutter, having bombed Frankfurt not once, but twice. And of course for the French, whose country's been invaded, whose country's being destroyed by the German army, for them to be able to go and attack Frankfurt, to attack any German city, is very important. Not so much for the damage that's done, but for the incredible rousing spirit that it gives the French people, especially when Jacques Martin and others write about the bombing of Frankfurt and other cities. And here you can see he's stepping out of the aircraft, I think after his second raid on Frankfurt. Here is Georges Durand. Turned out he has a brother, Paul, who served in the East. So researching the two Dutch aviate brothers sometimes gets a little confusing. So they were both volunteers, and Georges Durand was an observer, and he eventually became a pilot. But he was briefly famous in 1915 because his aircraft, he was the observer with the Captain Morris, and the aircraft was tremendously wrecked, and he had to go out on the wing to hold the strut together, and they landed that way, and then they put Morris and Durand's aircraft in Les Invalides up on a pillar, so you could see this incredibly wrecked aircraft that made it back after its combat. And as you know, Les Invalides would have German aircraft and all sorts of things throughout the war that people could go and look at.
Didn't he also design a new camera?
Well,
for the French?
absolutely. So he made it into Jacques Martin's magazine as well, but not to the extent of his friend Jean Beaumont. So here in Gorel is a picture of the Durand factory. Later in the war, he went, the French were not interested. Durand developed these cameras as an observer for these aerial cameras, and the French were not interested in them, but the Americans were. And so the Americans had their own funded his factory to actually build these aerial cameras. So here you have a Dutch from Holland. You know, back then it wasn't the Netherlands, it was Holland. This Dutch volunteer in the French Air Force who was an aviator, becomes a pilot, and in the latter part of the war, 1918, he's running the Durand factory for the Americans to build aerial cameras. Sort of like, how would this come about? But it did. And there he is sitting with his American counterpart. Now, this is the cover of the photograph album, and after looking at it, you sort of wonder if isn't that Durand with the mustache in the back. And I always wondered who this person was. And I looked and I looked, and I knew it wasn't Ham, and it wasn't Faray. And eventually, through all sorts of different things, I came across this magazine, which has in the lower corner the same signature, Charles Hallo. And so who is Charles Hallo? Discovered with Dennis Albin's help. Dennis has this wonderful French aviation website. If you haven't been to it, it's fantastic for French aviation. This wonderful picture, and it shows Charles Hallo in he's not in SPA 23, but he's sharing the airfield. His unit's sharing the airfield with SPA 23. And he is painting the insignia on the side of an aircraft. How many times have we talked about and looked at insignia of Lafayette Escadrille and Rumplers and Halberstadts? And here is actually someone doing it, painting the insignia. Charles Hallo was an artist, but his role was also observation when he entered the war. And here he is seeing the very large camera. He's on the right, and they're about to take off, and he kept sketchbooks during the war, and all of this is now...
That looks like MF-44. With that band down at the bottom
right,
of the
right.
cell.
Here is a picture of him. Now, he was an observer, and he painted insignia on aircraft, and it turns out he painted the painting on the cover of the photograph album. He goes from being an observer in the French Air Force to being head of the aerial photograph recognition unit of the Second Army, which is, you know, just amazing that quickly he did that. Here he is sitting in his office. You can see the maps and the aerial photographs, and he's a lieutenant, and he's running this aerial recognition unit. And I haven't found out who did this painting of him, but it's at the end of the war. The war finishes, and he goes back to illustration. And he started doing posters. And he decided to create his own sort of unique signature, Hallo, the way you'd say it in French, not barely pronouncing the H.
Hallo, hallo.
And then in the 20s, he lands this incredible contract with the French railroads. And the French railroads are creating this incredible post-war tourist industry. People are traveling throughout France, going to the Riviera on French trains. So tourism in France in the 20s is a very, very big deal. And it's pushed and marketed by the French rail system. And who is their illustrator?
Hallo.
Charles Hallo. And these posters, you may have seen some of these posters there. He did vast numbers when you do a Google. This is just a small, I mean, it's a vast number. And then even in the 50s, he works for Hermes, the $400 scarf maker. I guess there are a lot more than that now, where he's designing scarves for Hermes. So he really has turned out to be quite the artist. He also is the curator and founder of a museum in his hometown of Senlis in France. During the Second World War, he went back to be a teacher of aerial observation to the French Air Force. And of course, that lasted very shortly because they were overrun by the Germans in the Second World War, and so they were demobilized, and he went right into the French resistance. Now here's a man that's born in 1882. So in 1940, he's 58 years old. He's demobilized, and he goes into the French resistance. And he was actually with Jade Amical Network. And Jade Amical Network is, their specialty was gathering intelligence, not sabotage, not espionage, but gathering very important detailed intelligence on where German units were in France and so forth. When Senlis is liberated by the American troops in August of 1944, he started photographing from a window. And he captures this photograph along with many others, but this one, which is then the poster for an exhibit that went on this year in Senlis at the museum that he was a curator at. His photograph of an American liberating sediments. So we sort of go full circle. Back to this. For me, it was just a question, you know, who painted this? And Alan Tolley shared with me these photographs of Escadrille 23, Sopwith 1.5 strutters.
Which indicates he probably did that version from life.
Yeah, I'd hope so. Yeah, it's another view of the same one. This was number 5, and then they got number 6 and number 7. John, I know you and Alan and done some work on those early.
Well, they discovered that they got some 1.5 strutters from the British, and these are some of the low numbers before Henriot could start building them under license, and from late numbers on, they start, for one thing, the cockade, which covered over a British one, started to disappear in favor of nothing and was covered by unit emblems. But the earliest ones had French cockades painted over the British originals because they were British imports that tied them over until Henriot could get production going on the Sopwith 1A2 in this case, or the single-seat bomber 1B1.
Charlie, before you move from that photo,
yeah.
The tail of the one that's just out of frame, that is one wild paint scheme, it looks like.
Over here.
Yeah, the stripes.
If you're interested,
That is
there are
2
some
red
others.
stripes, and I was going to mention with N23, when they finally settled on a unit marking, it was a red stripe down the side of the fuselage, and there'd be a lot of personal markings that they were being weaned of in a way, but like Escadrille 124, for much of the war, and Spot 23 did not use personal motifs rather than numbers, and it took the form of a kind of a cameo-like oval in the middle of that red stripe, and the pilot would have some kind of a motif added to his personal taste, like diagonal blue and white lines, or that skull and whatever that Hallo is adding to the 1.5 strutter, and everyone had some variation on that, and I'm sure he was kept pretty busy doing up someone's personal marking on those cameos.
Yes, he was probably, I imagine it was very popular. I sort of, from this strutter to that strutter, these are obviously different strutters. This is a later.
Yeah, that's probably one of the Henriot built ones.
Yeah, so it turned out that, there we are, we're finished. It was, you know, just a work in progress. You know, there's no great final denouement here, but